Hey, welcome, Faithful Politics listeners and viewers. If you're watching us on our YouTube channel, I am your political host, Will Wright, joined by your ever faithful host, Pastor Josh Bertram. How's it going, Josh? Uh, Heyo. This week we have with us Dr. Allyson Shortle. She's an associate professor at the University of Oklahoma, where she studies group identity in the context of American political behavior. She also co-authored Cambridge University Press book, The Everyday Crusade, Christian Nationalism in American Politics, which examines the relationship between American religious exceptionalism and prejudicial and anti-democratic attitudes. She's currently extending this line of research to examine the many faces of ethnocultural nationalism, defining identity according to ascriptive traits such as race, religion, and gender. And at the doctoral level, she teaches courses on group identity, public opinion, political psychology, and behavioral research methods. So welcome to the show, Doctor.
Thanks for having me, and good morning.
Yeah, good morning. Yeah, and so just to kind of set the stage, or to get us started, I'm really curious about you showing your class our C-SPAN interview, because for the listeners, when we sought out, sent out an email saying, hey, we'd really love to have you on the show, sent you links of different stuff, just so you would think that we're really cool people. You responded back about you showing your students the C-SPAN interview, so I kind of want to know a little bit more about that.
Sure. Well, a big part of what I do in my courses is to try and teach civil discourse and trying to get through the political polarization that exists today. So when you contacted me, this was right in my thinking of a possible intervention into partisan polarization in the US, like role modeling, how you might engage in discourse with people who are from entirely different backgrounds and who have different views. So it was right up my alley, and I needed to really highlight this to show my students what we are, attempting to do in this particular course as well, which is we're focusing on news deserts in rural Oklahoma. And these students, I need to impress upon them, no matter what your background is, you have to view everybody in a humane way and not engage in these dehumanizing stereotypes, and try to engage in these interviews in a way where people feel like they can trust you, because they should. You should treat them with respect, no matter what their ideological positions happen to be. So it was great. They loved it. They really thought it was an innovative way of demonstrating how you might really have these meaningful political conversations without delving into this outgroup animus that we're seeing all the time.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, because it's one of the reasons that we started this podcast. I mean, I'm pretty politically engaged. Pastor Josh, not so much. I mean, he's really sort of focused on matters of faith, religious, so on and so forth. And politically speaking, him and I are polar opposites on most things. I would say, like most of the major issues, we're pretty. We come from different perspectives, but but we're still friends and we can engage with stuff. I mean, most of the times when we engage on issues that are like very polarizing, like we kind of add a level of levity or comedy to it.
Oh, that's great.
Also,
Yeah.
I mean, like him and I are also just very sarcastic by nature. So, I mean, like a lot of times we can be like, oh, guess what Biden's doing? Or, oh, guess what Trump's doing, I think it's great that you're doing this.
Yeah, and I thank you for offering this. It's just a sort of a cheat code where I don't have to do it, and I can show your your beautiful attempts at doing this, putting yourself out there, which is even, that is, I'm sure that must have come with a lot of trepidation to, how will people receive this? Are we going to get attacked by now not just one side of the spectrum, but both sides of the spectrum for different reasons?
Yeah.
So I respect this. This is, you really put your money where your mouth is by doing a podcast like this.
Yeah. So like what made you want to get into kind of like this field? I mean, like political psychology and sort of just the work that you do.
Well, I really came at it from a deep interest in issues of inequality And I mean, I grew up in a pretty, I'd say lower middle class community, almost blue collar community in Vermont, which is largely thought to be this very privileged, rich state. But I grew up in a town that's arguably, the opposite of what the vision of Vermont sort of looks like.
Mm.
I feel like if any friends are listening, they're going to just hate me for saying that. They're like, no, it's the best. A lot of pride of place, but still, realistically, we were left with, less resources than a lot of other people in the state of Vermont. And I was fascinated by these issues of inequality that affected people in my hometown. Whenever people would get laid off, which tended to happen a lot in my hometown, that really affected our community. So I was interested in studying that. And when I went to college and then graduate school, issues of inequality in a political sense really were being handled by political psychologists at the time. I naturally landed there due to my interest in these types of issues about inequality. At the time, I think because Vermont is very homogenous, my feelings around it or my thoughts and ideas were all about class inequality,
Mhm.
but quickly evolved once I left, the Vermont context into other mixed contexts. I realized, wow, racial inequality, gender inequality, issues like religious freedom, all of these interest me. So I got into political psychology to be able to examine all of them all at
Mm.
once under the banner of this singular sort of discipline of political psychology.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and I'm curious, like, how do you go about teaching, about political psychology without, having your own personal bias, kind of have a part to play. I mean, like, you're like all of our biases will influence and probably, direct us to take on certain positions stronger than others. So like, how do you like manage that?
I think it's about brutal honesty about yourself to your students. We don't often, as academics, we try and exude authority to be able to control the classroom or control the discussion, right? But I think in order to limit discord in your classroom, the first thing that you have to say is admitting that, everybody has a bias and it's impossible to exist in this world without this perceptual lens that's built through your experiences and your beliefs. And so a lot of what they read is going to probably be not only my own bias of topics that I want to study, but also the fields as a whole. So if that at all offends students, I sort of encourage them to tell me about it and tell me what they think is missing and sort of meet them where they are, because you have to have that radical empathy of what about the student in my class who doesn't necessarily want to talk about identity, right? Who doesn't
Mm,
want uh, to listen to certain topics in a way that maybe they are not comfortable with. Maybe they've never heard and they need some help along the way talking about them, or even, realizing that they can engage in the conversation and not be attacked. They can engage in the conversation and not be told that they're stupid. They can just have open dialogue and learn and be able to fail without being censured, without being, yelled at by their classmates, by their professor. It's about respect at the end of the day. So I'm pretty open about, if you don't like it, yeah, let me know, because I'm not always right. There's a lot of material where I agree there needs to be different studies. And I use it through the research lens to say, maybe you can be part of that new research that's missing from the literature. And I try and excite them more in a research sense, because that's really what I'm trained to do. Other than just at the end of the day, they're humans, I'm a human, I respect them. Not only that, but as an educator, I'm there to support them. So I try and really, really lean into my role as an educator, as a researcher, and just as someone who wants everybody to feel comfortable in the classroom.
I love that. I love that you have that kind of ethos about your classroom. I think that's really cool.
Thanks.
It would be nice to have a professor that did that. And so it's pretty cool to have that. You know, have you heard of Chat GPT?
Yes.
I'm sure you have in the
Have I
academic
heard of
world.
that TV?
Yeah, because everyone's trying to cheat in your classes by asking like what, you know, Rousseau's, you know, view of blah, blah, blah was. Well, anyway, you know, what's funny about Chat GPT is you start looking into it and they've programmed bias into it, right? Because they can't help it because the programmers are biased. And so things are just programmed into it. And it makes me think, you know, like, hey, we're making this, you know, I'm a preacher, so I got to think everything in terms of theology. So God created us in his image, and now we're creating artificial intelligence in ours with all the biases and all the stuff that it has. So one of my questions is, we had Donald McEachin on. He was a rep in the House of Representatives. And he basically said, in response to why is there such a political divide, he basically blamed people. And he said, if people, like basically politics, the political atmosphere is just a reflection of the attitudes of the people voting them in. Now, I actually take issue with that because I find it hard to believe that's true with some, not I think to some extent, but with all the different, like how it can feel like the political leaders even you have in are so separated from me. And so I think they've taken the radical views, but in some ways on both sides. But anyway, what do you guys talk about in there, like in terms of like our relationship with our representatives and our government and the cyclical relationship there? Like, do we make them in our image? Do they make us in our image? Is it both and? What's going on here? What do you think?
Well, this is a great classic question of politics, a big question of our political leaders, the elites, are they panderers or shirkers? You know, is the public driving policy, is the public driving things like polarization because the people want this, or they specifically are holding in our representative democracy, are the officials accountable for their actions? Or is it elites who are in fact pretty much just manipulating the public, right? Or if not manipulating, being very savvy with the way that they are controlling political outcomes. And there's a little bit of truth to each, but if we're talking about political polarization, I think there's a lot more evidence that this is an elite-run phenomenon, just based on, if you look at beliefs of the American public, they're much more moderate than we see versus the elites that exist. So we're seeing like a larger far-right contingent than you'd expect in the American public. The American public does not want any sort of instability in their government system. This is not something that anyone, you don't want to walk down the street and think, is my government going to collapse today? Nope, we don't want that. That's not a popular belief. But there are elites who definitely, we assume that they want to be reelected more than anything else. That citizen accountability is what they care about the most. But we are entering into this new sort of era where that's not necessarily the case. They might not have to care necessarily about the true interests of the citizens. They just have to be able to use the wisest framing or, crafted talk surrounding what they believe and what policies they're going to accomplish to then make it seem like they're being responsive to citizens when in fact they might not be at all. And certainly when you look at sort of this history of the Tea Party capturing the Republican Party, or just the Freedom Caucus's rise, right? You see that the agenda there for Republicans from these factions has been we don't care if Republicans will lose one singular election. What we care about is that our candidates are going to be the ones who are going to be the face of the Republican Party. So typically, if they cared about reelection, they would still vote for, a moderate Republican, these extremist Republicans. But these elites they're not willing to endorse moderate Republicans, right? They are unto themselves wanting to support an extremist face of the Republican Party, right? And that provides a cue to citizens to then sort of latch onto these ideas as well, even when most citizens, most Republicans, happen to be on the more moderate end of, or at least have historically been more moderate, but we see more conservatism creeping up, more extreme conservatism, because of the elite cues that people are picking up on. The normalization of some of these outside factions, these extremist factions within one party or the other. Now, we're seeing it mainly within the Republican Party. It definitely happens for Democrats as well, but there's been less political coalition work there and less success of the far left for Democrats than there has been for the far right with Republicans. But no, I think in summary, I disagree with that. I'd say I view this as more of a elite-led phenomenon, and I think people at the end of the day want stability, and they don't love the polarization that they're seeing.
Got it. Can you talk a little bit more about like that polarization and maybe specifically, like this in-group, out-group phenomenon? One of the famous studies that I like to cite a lot on the show for right or wrong, or maybe you can correct me, is like this concept of like motive attribution asymmetry. This is like one of those like peer-reviewed papers I read, and I all of a sudden thought I was super smart, and like, but it really opened my eyes to better, put into context like what we're seeing and why, Democrats hate Republicans, or, Israel hates Palestine, or whatnot. So can you maybe like go into a little more depth about like what is this in-group and out-group mentality?
Sure. Well, there's a lot of different psychological theories that can explain this. And this motive asymmetry is based on this idea that we tend to think just naturally that our own in-groups, whatever actions we accomplish, whatever behaviors we engage in, are because of in-group love. Like this very positive thing. Well, we just love our group and we're doing what's best for the group. We're nice people. We're kind people just doing the best we can by us. Whereas we tend to think outgroups are doing any action for nefarious reasons, for outgroup hate. They're doing it just to spite us. They're doing it for no good reason. It doesn't advantage them. They just want to disadvantage us. And so this plays into the polarization process, because we can see that we just aren't going to give the other side a fair shake if we automatically assume they're our enemies whose sole purpose is to get us, to defeat us in some way. This comes from really classic, like some simpler theories in political psychology. I think the most basic you can get is when you are dealing with a minimal group effect. So minimal group effects was an initial theory back in the late 70s by Henry Tajfel, and some other work on self-categorization theory by John Turner. And their point is that even when you don't have a meaningful group identity, so if I were to assign you into an arbitrary group of, you are a Klee art fan, and this other person is a Kandinsky art fan, which is legitimately how this classic experiment works. You get grouped into one art fan versus the other art fan group. You will seek to, based on those categories, give your group, like maximize the amount of rewards that your group has relative to the outgroup. And that exists even beyond both of you getting the most possible. The most important thing automatically for human beings, well, the majority of human beings, is to get more than the opposing side. Like maximize that difference. And the reason why people do that, according to psychologists, is because they want to elevate their self-esteem as much as possible as group members. So if you extrapolate that to an arbitrary group membership, but then you actually have a meaningful group membership, just imagine how much you're trying to elevate yourself compared to outgroups. This is ripe for things like prejudice. This is ripe for behaviors like discrimination that sort of automatically happen if you're not really cognizant of your own tendency to do this and to try and like really not discriminate and not form prejudicial attitudes based on these really psychologically based instincts as well. So really it's this natural tendency that can be ramped up by outsiders, by elites, by political discourse. It's very easy to get people to fall into these patterns if we don't work really hard to minimize these natural tendencies.
Is that tied at all to the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like our want or desire to be self-actualized, and politics is just sort of like the cudgel by which we can help ourselves become self-actualized?
My answer to that is probably. That sounds great. I was like, that's a smart comment, and probably. Yeah, but it's definitely a desire to, we need to categorize the world around us, and we need to know our position and role in the world. And it's crucial to human beings. So absolutely, it's about self-actualization. I haven't heard that exact one-to-one, but I think you're right. Yeah, that sounds right to me.
All right. Yes.
Yeah, that sounds like a good theory. I'll go with that one.
Josh, go ahead.
Yeah. No, yeah. I was so one thing that I was thinking about is when it comes to like our sense of identity, how much does what role does politics play in our sense of identity as people, as members of a society, and whatever it is, and how does this play into how hard it is at times? It seems very difficult to change people's minds politically.
Yeah.
I'm wondering what does that tell us about
I think
the power or the role of political belief and
plays a very
in
fluid role in people's overall identity. I think at times in certain contexts it can be incredibly important, and I think you see in the course of a political conversation, people will draw on their political identity, and then it's massively important in that context. But overall, I'd say it's variable. It can be really ephemeral. A lot of people don't care that much about politics, but they do want to win a political argument. So that makes for a tricky situation where they're not meaningfully thinking in terms of, I'm a Republican, I'm a Democrat every day of their lives. But they could be. Some people will. Most, it's not really going to enter into their minds unless it's brought up in conversation, or they, will have to cast a vote. Otherwise, it's hard to get people to truly engage in a meaningful way about thinking about what it means to hold a certain identity, a certain political identity. Most people are not very ideological, meaning that they don't even understand liberal and conservative labels. Most people don't know that the Republican Party is more conservative and the Democratic Party is more liberal. And that makes it really difficult to say that these political identities that people hold are, that there's as much going into there as some other identities that are much more well thought out and affect them every single day of their lives. So it is really important to politics and to any sort of political outcome that we're examining. Political identity will matter because in the context, it's very important. Not for every single issue, but I think what we're seeing more and more is that even though people haven't really thought out their political identities, they are allowing their political identity to shape other outcomes that aren't necessarily political. So we have some evidence that partisanship is affecting whether or not people want to identify under certain religious identities, right? Politics is affecting religion. Politics is affecting our families many times, but in ways that are really all about your attachment to the partisan group, not necessarily different beliefs that you have.
Yeah, it's really like, I think the political identity issue is one of the most fascinating things to me about politics as a whole, because I don't know who said this, but I read once where it's like, if you were to describe a white male, dressed in a suit, holding a briefcase, what are some of the, with an American flag hanging from their house, and you would also take like a female person of color, who gets their, morning coffee at Starbucks, with non-fat goat milk, whatever, and then try to decide, like, which one of these two do you think, are fully vaccinated for COVID? Like, most people would say,
which one of these two voted for Trump?
Yeah, like you can assume a lot about a person's politics based on just very
just
basic
like a look.
Yeah.
Clothes and a flag, or if they believe one thing, then there's a cluster of beliefs that you're pretty sure, and probably pretty accurate most of the time, that they do believe that. Like if someone is not pro-life or is pro-life, then you can probably guess how they're voting.
Right, on every other issue.
Yeah,
well, it's
that's
a little
strange.
It's true. It's like you can size someone up pretty quickly, right, based on one little piece of information. But the mechanism isn't necessarily that they believe these other things that are compatible. It's I'll give you an example. So some of my research is on Christian nationalism. And what's interesting to me about that is you can see that people of color have higher levels of Christian nationalism. When you just ask a question, do you think to be a true American, you should be Christian? Black and Latino Americans are much more likely to say yes to that than a white American. The difference is that Black and Latino Americans aren't going to connect that to conservative opinions, but white Americans who subscribe to Christian nationalism are. So even when people hold, like, we're usually incorrect about the homogenous attitudes that certain groups of people hold. They're quite diverse. It's just the way that they interact with the political system tends to lead them to different outcomes. So a big part of that is this enduring psychological attachment they have to their party. They want their party to win, but they might not necessarily agree with everything that their party platform stands for. We just have trouble sort of teasing out that nuance when we discuss it. And we're not really sure what to make of it, because largely we're just talking about the vote. Usually we're not getting into the weeds about, well, what do people actually believe, and why does it lead some groups to go in one direction and others in this other direction?
Yeah, that's so interesting, because it in the news anyways, it's always like a big deal when somebody switches parties. So you've got one senator, congressperson that's like, okay, I'm a Republican, I'm switching to Democrat, or vice versa. And like, outside of, policies, I've always been curious, like, why people gravitate towards that or consider that such a big thing. It's like, I mean, and I'm wondering, is it really just because, like, people have associated themselves so much with their own political identity, then to change it is so, radical? I mean, like, if one day I decide that, I no longer want to be a Democrat, I want to become a dog, or something like that. Like people look at me kind of weird.
Democrat to dog.
Yeah. That old thing. So like it's I don't know. It's just it's fascinating, and I'm you know and I'm curious like how do we develop this like identity? I mean, like is it external? Like do we develop this identity because we see how other people are identifying with it, or is this something more internal that we I don't know. I'm curious. How does that identity sort of develop?
Well, that's a great question. It tends to be the most stable sort of mover of our opinions and our political identity that we know of, meaning across several elections, you will vote for the Democrat or Republican. You don't necessarily know what liberal or conservative means, but you will hold this identity.
Yeah.
It tends to be socialized into us at first. So in childhood, when we look at political socialization literature, we don't see children really developing sophisticated political standpoints, but they do internalize and learn respect for authority at a very young age, right? This can be a childhood socialization. They learn to respect government institutions usually in this process. It's not until adolescence that people start delving into more specific political thoughts where they're actually developing their partisanship for the first time. And ever since from adolescence until adulthood, until maybe the age of 35, this is the area where you have some room to learn and to change your partisanship, but you've still been socialized to have certain values, to subscribe to certain values at a young age. And that goes into that partisanship, which then can be affected in adulthood. But we don't often see a ton of switching. We see very, very little switching after the age of 35 as part of the socialization process. But when we do, it tends to be from people who, because it is very uncommon and we tend to fall along these similar lines of political learning at certain ages, they tend to have thought about it a little bit more. That's either an exogenous shock has occurred. This is maybe someone who's arrived at politics later in life. This is, someone who just seeks to be a little more thoughtful about what their vote is and what sorts of attitudes they've developed throughout time. So mainly, we don't see a lot of partisan switching, but it's not impossible. It does happen. We just see it level out on one side or the other. And we are surprised because it is so important to people in how they form their vote in particular. Most of the research in political science is based on this very finding from the 60s that partisanship is the lead explanatory variable in voting behavior in the United States. And that's really how people organize their thoughts around how to think about politics, is through whether one is a Republican, a Democrat, or an independent.
Because I always thought, when Trump came on the scene and won the election, there was, I don't know, maybe like one or two news stories about the Obama voters that voted for Trump, and I always just thought, okay, so I'm a Democrat. I could never imagine a world where I would have voted for Trump, having voted for Obama twice. And I feel like there's something there that could probably use much more exploration, because maybe all of this is just hindsight, because nobody really knew how Trump was going to be or knew the type of president Trump was going to be, but like that mindset seems something worth studying. Is that, I don't know, what do you think about that?
Well, I think in that, I don't mean to be unsophisticated about this in particular, but there is when a president has enjoyed a couple of administrations, mm-hmm. It's very uncommon that the other party, the opposing party to whoever that president is, does not win the election. It's just wildly uncommon. And that's sort of a macro level factor that drives behavior in that way. People want something new. people tend to, want to have divided government. They want to have these balance of powers, but they tend to not want the same party over and over and over again. So I view it as being able to pick off some swing voters based on that mentality of, hey, we need to do something different. Like I'm not satisfied with the way things are going for myself or for my community. Let's try something different. And you're going to get some people who aren't incredibly strong partisans, or even if they are, if they just believe that it's time for a change, it's easier to pick people off after a two-term presidency in particular. But there's also some good research on Hillary Clinton's candidacy, where we know a lot of the people who did switch were motivated by certain factors having to do with maybe some sexism or some response to her candidacy in particular, did turn a lot of voters off in the Democratic Party.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I, being a student of the Bible and doing a lot of research into original settings and the cultural world of the ancient Near East and of the Palestine area, one thing that you come into contact with a lot is myth, the idea of myth, and the idea that, especially when you look at the ancient Near East and these very, very ancient myths, which has a very technical definition that's very different than the kind of lay definition and common use definition of myth. And I know that some of your work and talking about has to do with myth and myths and politics and the power of those myths. Explain what's going on, because when our normal listener probably hears myth, they think fairy tale, made up, right. Cinderella, whatever. What's going on here?
Okay, yeah, because it is much broader. A myth isn't necessarily a very specific thing. It's a shared belief, essentially how the world works in order to prop up some sort of view of the world. So, in talking about the concept, I talk about it in the concept of American religious exceptionalism, where, this idea that America is a chosen country by God. People may believe that, but we can't test it. So we say it's a myth because anything that's untestable is just a narrative that helps people position themselves and relate to the world around them. And that could be a stereotype, that could be anything that people tell themselves that's sort of been passed on through generations. And we're in particular interested in these myths that happened and were generated at the founding to be able to keep the country stable and together.
So let me make sure I understand what you're saying. So a myth is not, you can't think of myth in categories of true and false. You have to think of myth in categories of the amount of belief, the time at which the myth comes up, and the kinds of worldview that the myth undergirds and supports. Is that
right? Absolutely.
Is that correct?
That's a great way to phrase it. Yes.
Wow. Yeah. So here's switching gears just a little bit. The recent death of Mr. Nichols in Memphis by 5 Black police officers. It just feels different than some of the other deaths that happen at the hands of law enforcement. And if I'm just being completely honest, it's because the officers were Black, not white. And I know that you've done some work and some study in this field. So I'm curious, what is the race gender dynamics of criminal justice attitudes? Tell us about, this particular event.
Well, I think this one, it looks very different to people, right? I think people know what to think about it, or at least they have their talking points when they see white officers. And Black survivors or Black victims, Black perpetrators, right? They view that and they know how to respond, right? You'll hear people on the left say that this is police violence. You'll hear some on the right saying that this is just police procedure and that, there's no racist motivation going on. And now we have 5 Black officers and we have a Black victim who has died, unfortunately. And so the question then is like, oh, well, this must be procedure, right? This can't possibly be racism if it's Black on Black violence. But that's not necessarily true. And I'm not taking a stand on either side here, but what I am saying is that these procedures and how we can understand the racial implications of this is by looking at institutions and their procedures and who they affect, not necessarily who's committing them. Because institutionally speaking, we can have procedures that might lead to higher rates of Black deaths, right? That might be going on. And if that's the case, that is, a racialized system. That's not necessarily bad apples. Like these police officers who end up involved in these shootings, they themselves are often depicted as these independent perpetrators and the people to blame, right? When overall, this might be a system effect that has racialized outcomes. So we should look at it more holistically as, this is more of the same. This is clearly indicating that maybe there are some racial outcomes that have to do with the particular procedures involved. This was a task force. We tend to see task force involved in these types of controversies. So I'm not quite sure if that's the root cause of it, but I think it's important to demarcate between what we would call bad apples and maybe the bad barrel effect. So how do we solve this? We could punish those bad actors involved and say that it was all their fault. Or we could unpack it a little bit more and see what are the procedures in place that make Black Americans significantly more likely to die of police-involved shootings than white Americans, than most other racial groups in America. We have to at least look into that without having any judgment whatsoever in terms of what the motivations of the personal officers were or the police department. We need that research. We need to see what those procedures are. And we need to find a way, to solve this issue that, this is more than a random effect. African Americans, Black Americans in the United States are just at a much higher risk of dying from police involved shootings. And this keeps happening regardless of the race of the officer. So the answer is certainly not to have a more diverse police force, I think we could say. But maybe that would contribute to some sort of grassroots change of police departments, but this certainly pokes hole in the notion that if we had more Black officers, we would have no, Black men die at the hands of police officers. This is sort of what we should be unpacking about the racial dynamics of this particular incident.
Well, yeah. So, yeah. Sorry, I was pausing because, like, I don't know if you've seen the video, but like it's pretty bad.
I try not to watch. Yeah, I just can't. And I know a lot of I try as much as possible not to watch and not to share, because I know, especially that's a lot to put on, Black Americans in particular, to show violence over and over and over again. But I read some transcripts. It sounded truly horrific, and I think it's really hard for all of us to understand. I don't understand. I don't feel like I have information about it, and I think, like every other American, I would love to have more answers and more serious investigation into why does this happen and what can we do to help.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And I absolutely agree with you in that and share that sentiment. It's so hard to talk about politics, with people that disagree with you. And we've talked about this and kind of hinted to this. And in our conversation. So one of my questions, though, is what's the application in the sense in this way? Like, should I avoid talking to my family or people I really like about politics when they don't agree with me? Obviously, I don't think that will be your answer necessarily, but what should we do, like, when we're coming into a conversation like this? How can psychology help us to enter into these conversations with more grace and with a higher success rate in the end?
I have some recommendations. I can't say my own have been successful with my own family. So take this with a bucket of salt. It's incredibly hard. I think, this is very much affected by my own personal, I'm sure my family, a political scientist as a family member, doesn't go over well. I am not the person that they want engaging. The last thing they want is a professor at the table talking about. So I think part of it is just a lot of patience and a lot of not necessarily centering yourself in the conversation or centering other people in the conversation, but just asking questions and trying to meet someone where they want to be met. So I ask questions carefully. And it's hard to get into the mindset of I'm not going to take anything personally. That is the real struggle. But I think you need to emphasize like what commonalities you have. Like at the end of the day, if we can't like look at our family members and say, we're a family, so we're going to get through this political conversation. There's no other identity that I can imagine is more powerful than the connection you have with people you love. So I think it's about figuring out how you have conversations with your loved ones in a way where they continue to feel loved and they continue to feel empathy. And that can be really hard when you're talking about politics, but not impossible. I think just being really upfront about it. I think we try and be quiet when we should talk more. Right? Try to be honest about, listen, I get you have this point of view and you don't want to hear from me, but I'm just curious where you're coming from because you're a reasonable person and I respect you. So I just want to know your beliefs. And at the end of the day, I think everyone just wants to hear that you respect them. And sometimes that's hard to muster when you disagree with someone politically, but with a family member, I think everyone should be able to make this happen as long as you care about the family bond more than you care about winning politically. And, look into your hearts. We all have to look into our hearts. We all need to get to that point. That being said, I realize the immense challenge that I go through, as well as I'm sure everybody who's listening in trying to achieve this, but that's my very hippie answer. Like, just love each other, just share the love. But I do sort of think it comes down to that.
Yeah, oftentimes I feel like politics is just like, the trolley problem where, one pull of the lever, sends you down the Democrat track and the other sends you down the Republicans. But then like ultimately the other side loses and dies, or at least that's sort of like the point. And really it's like, could you just sort of pull the lever halfway so that way it goes down the middle? But it doesn't really seem like that's really all that popular or attractive. I mean, if I were to look at the metrics for our show, I would probably see very high spikes for when we have very right-leaning people on the show, and very high spikes when we see very left-leaning, and like there's sort of a committed few that will stick out, for all the stuff in the middle. So to that, I thank you to our listeners and our viewers that do. But it's like I can't understand why politics, that engages in a civil manner is so unattractive. Like why people are watching more Fox than they are C-SPAN, And I'm curious to get your thoughts on like why do our politics have to be so sexy to get attention?
Well, I think it's, people enjoy exercise, but not really. That's um, when people are asked in these old studies about news media coverage, people were asked what sort of news do you want, and they're always like, I just wanted to state the facts. I don't want all these frills. I don't want it bleeds, it leads. All of this is atrocious. And so those same people, though, when asked, do you watch PBS or listen to NPR? These nonprofit
Mhm.
modes of, gaining, consuming information. And no, they don't watch that. I think in theory, everybody wants just the facts and they want, no conflict. But in practice, people are looking for entertainment when they get their news, when they get their information. And they have so many different options that, also they have limited time. I think we don't ever talk about the fact that parenting takes more hours than it used to. Like there's all of these burdensome things that everybody has to engage in that quite honestly were less hours previously that we've spent on many of these other tasks, and we don't give people enough credit for the immense amount of time it takes to become informed, and where is that going to come from, and how are they going to stay awake? you know
Yeah.
I understand it. I think there needs to be some balance of entertainment that's not so one-sided all the time, but that's sort of the news media environment, the landscape that we have right now. So maybe that offers some opportunity going forward for people who want to offer more entertaining, moderate
Mhm.
news. I don't know if all of us are laughing because we know it doesn't really truly exist right now, but
Yeah.
that's not
Yeah.
to say it can't be achieved.
It's true. Yeah, I think that the most our listeners can expect on this show is like really bad dad jokes. Like I tell a lot of them.
Well,
My
that's right up there, though. I think dad jokes are, the closest to heaven you can get on earth, right?
No doubt about that, dude.
my kids are 6 and 9, and they like to point out when I say a dad joke. I'm like, you don't have to point it out. Like let's just let the dad joke exist in the space and environment in which it was articulated. But
No, good for them. They're powerful children already, contributing
um,
to society.
Yeah. My last question, I want to learn a little bit more about this project you did in last year with your students that involved like like exit polls
Oh,
and
okay.
and whatnot. Maybe you can talk a little bit more about that. What did you discover, or maybe what was the origin of the project, and what were some of the findings that you got after it was done?
Yeah, sure. So I run the Oklahoma City exit poll during presidential and midterm elections. With the exception of 2020, I decided let's let's stay home for that.
Smart. Yeah.
Um, you know, so I've made this into a class where the students are actually the survey enumerators. They go out into Oklahoma City in 12 precincts and they collect the data. They have tablets or paper and pen surveys, and they just ask people after they vote to take the survey. And then I use that to sort of teach these students survey methodology, as well as how to analyze some of these survey data that they receive. And they decide what goes on the survey. As a result, our college students, which even in Oklahoma means it's a little liberally biased survey. I can't deny that. I'm like, oh wow. I try to reword as much as possible, but these are college students. So, but they go out. The citizens of Oklahoma City love it. They just, really enjoy being heard, and the students get this great appreciation for democracy because of it. Just being out at the polls all election day will give you an appreciation for people just letting their voice be heard. It's important work, and I just love it. The main findings for me are just, oh yeah, the students end up learning some math. I trick them into learning a little math and being more employable. And they also gain this appreciation of, the political process, which brings me a lot of joy to see. Brings me a lot of joy to see people who enter into areas of Oklahoma City that they've never seen, and actually make contact with people who they never would have talked to. It's been really interesting. And then beyond that, we had some really cool tribal identity attitudes on this particular survey.
Interesting.
So we're going to unpack those a little bit more. And I have some research fellows that will be working on those. But we're very interested in what it means in the state of Oklahoma to have a tribal identity versus identifying simply as Native American or Indigenous, and how that connects to people's attitudes. And they're really unexpected. They're not what you would think. So I'll just leave it at that.
How cool is that? Yeah, I mean, like, what fields of work do many of your students end up going into? I mean, I feel like, in the world of political psychology, you could probably become a lobbyist or a campaign manager or something like that. Like, what are you hearing from your students?
Well, just by virtue of being a political scientist, the majority of my students become lawyers. They're pre-law, they go to law school, but a lot of them run for office. I have students who are in tribal government. I have students who are they're state representatives. I have some who are news anchors, lots of news anchors, lots of journalists. A meteorologist, he's a good. That's one of my favorites, is that one of our local meteorologists always wishes me a happy birthday, and I feel like a celebrity just by virtue of, which meteorology is huge in Oklahoma, and being in Tornado Alley. So
sure.
All over the map, really. But yeah, then campaign management, I've been really lucky. My students get jobs, so I'm really proud of them, and they're makes me just beam with pride with how diverse their positions are. I think med school, all over the map with a liberal arts education, but it helps to have just a little that you're tricked into learning a little math also helps. So
yeah, no kidding. And I know I said the last question, but I want to talk just real briefly about your book. So, The Everyday Crusade: Christian Nationalism in American Politics, and we talk about Christian nationalism a lot on the show. Just due to the nature of the premise of our show, faithful politics. I mean, there's so many overlaps, and I truthfully haven't gotten through all of your book. I've gotten through a large majority of it. I was cramming, as soon as you said yes, I was like, okay, I'm going to start reading her book. And it's a really good book. I mean, and I've read a ton of books about Christian nationalism, and I think one thing that your book provides that a lot of the other books kind of fall short on is just the level of research and just investigative. Academic investigation about the topic. So maybe you can just sort of talk a little bit more about the book, why you wrote it, why it's important.
Sure. Well, this is a project, and our version. So I wrote this with Eric McDaniel, who's at the University of Texas, and Irfan Nuruddin, who's at Georgetown University. And at one point, we just got together. I was writing a dissertation on nationalism and immigration attitudes. And they scooped me up for this paper. They were like, you, get over here. And Eric's father was a preacher. So he largely was into religion and politics. And at that time, I was just sort of dabbling. I was like, oh, this is interesting. But he showed me this idea that was just, in my opinion, was totally right. I was like, oh, wow. Yeah, these are definitely attitudes people hold. They think, America has a special place in God's plan. They think, these resources that the U.S. has are a reflection of God wanting the U.S. to spread its values throughout the world, but not liberal democratic values, religious values, which has been the major shift in this tone of American exceptionalism to evolve into what we call American religious exceptionalism. Now, at the time, we were still calling this Christian nationalism, but it really, we think it's a type of Christian nationalism, but we believe this is more fundamentally the type of ideology that has shaped people's attitudes since the founding are much more watered down. They're not necessarily these ideas of let's insert Christianity into the federal government, which absolutely is an ideology unto itself. But we're more interested in what are the more innocuous, American exceptionalist ideals that have turned more religious, turned into more of a Christian nationalism, but on its face aren't as recognizable. So we've been doing this. We collected data. We were writing this book forever, honestly. Like, it was a lot of projects. I think we started in 2007. I mean, this book took 15 years of data. So we have, tons of national surveys. I have an Oklahoma survey in there. We have a Kentucky survey, just to try and grapple with this idea of how popular is this ideology throughout time, who subscribes to it and who doesn't. And largely it's very popular, and people tend to connect it to some anti-democratic ideas. So political violence, support for political violence, as well as people tend to be who rank high, who we call our disciples of American religious exceptionalism, tend to be open to really non-democratic forms of government, such as military rule, autocracy. That doesn't mean that they also aren't supportive of democracy, but what makes them different from everybody else is they're open to this suggestion. Maybe one day they'd be okay, define democratic norms if it means that their side essentially wins. Which are other, God's chosen people. Who does that tend to look like? They think God's chosen people look like them. It's subjective, but they tend to think they look exactly like whoever they are, the person who subscribes to the ideology.
Yeah. We could probably spend a whole episode on just unpacking what you have in your book, and maybe we will one day. Maybe we'll have you and the other authors come on and kind of unpack that.
That'd be awesome.
It's a really interesting topic of discussion that I think, I'd really just love to kind of hear you and your other colleagues, thoughts on it. So, but thank you so much, Dr. Shortle. This was a really, really cool conversation. I'm really glad you came on and kind of helped drop some knowledge on us.
Thanks for having me. This was very fun. This is a great conversation to have. So I appreciate you both.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah. And thank you to our listeners and viewers. And we will see you all next week. Yeah. Take care. All right.